Good morning, and hey now, PASW staff, clients, and friends joining us today. Welcome to Wednesday's class. We've had a lot of fun so far. We looked at Jaws for our film scoring assignment, and then yesterday we looked at the great genius Scott Joplin. And today we are going to be kind of doing an extension of Joplin. We're going to be looking at one of the greatest pianists of all time. And this will be a two-part class, if that's okay with you. I like to kind of do short little sections because, our attention span, or at least my attention span, is kind of limited. So, and then we can really get into the meat of what we're talking about and have time to, relax and digest some of the information. Okay, so having said that, we're going to be talking about the beautiful, very sensitive Bill Evans today. Bill Evans transformed jazz piano in the 50s and 60s. He started in the 50s. And we're going to talk about his highly nuanced, sensitive approach to jazz and his melodies and his chord voicings. And if you're not sure about some of those terms, we're gonna go over them. We're going to talk about his life a bit. And then we're going to talk about two compositions, two songs in particular that he wrote and we'll look at harmonically and technically and musically what he did. And so we will have so much fun today, and I guarantee you'll enjoy this class. Let's just do it, right? Are we ready? Okay, let's dive into Bill Evans. So Bill Evans, American jazz piano player, known for real lush improvisations, very lyrical playing, just a fresh harmonic approach, and sensitive. And he was a very sensitive, introverted person, and you can hear that in his playing. People have said that knew him that he played like his personality was very much like he played, and vice versa, where he was speaking through the instrument. And we know this with artists that perform. They usually, when they perform and there's no, they're playing an instrument, we're really hearing their voice communicate. And sometimes you can communicate better, obviously, through the instrument, and you can express feelings that either can't be expressed or just feelings that are just there, and they're not meant to be communicated verbally. It's just a feeling. Okay, so let's get into his life. I mean, he was really fascinated at an early age with music. His mom played music, his brother played music, and he would eavesdrop on his brother practicing piano and practicing piano lessons. So by the time Bill was 6, he was taking lessons himself and could read music and absorb it so quickly. I mean, he was like an expert at sight reading at a really early age, and sight reading is playing it just, sight reading is kind of like reading a book. Like you don't practice reading it, you just read it. But with music, it's really tough because you have to look but it was super easy for him. So his mom was his first teacher, but he had a very close relationship to his brother Harry, who was a piano player throughout and they had a very, very close relationship throughout their life, particularly because their father was an alcoholic, and it was very uncomfortable being at the house. And I think Bill probably and Harry, they used music as a way to escape in some ways. So he goes to college at Southeastern Louisiana University and studies composition and piano at Mann's College of Music in New York. And he's interesting because he starts taking the way he connects chords and his improvised melodies. It's a romantic quality, and it's different than 1950s bebop. So if we're thinking of the 1950s, we did 2 classes on Bud Powell, and one of the most, brilliant, fast bebopping players. And remember what was important about Bud Powell. He was the first to sort of play like Charlie Parker, only played on the piano. He could play just as fast and play Charlie Parker's runs. And then we saw how sensitive and brilliant he played on Over the Rainbow, and how we did this whole thing on mental illness in that solo. So if you remember that a few months ago, this is going on, Bill Evans is going on a little bit after Bud Powell, but he was very influenced by Bud Powell. But their music doesn't sound alike that much. So what Bill Evans brings is a sensitive, romantic, classical approach. And when I say classical, I meant that he studied classical music and classical piano so intricately and brought that into the realm of jazz. And in particular, Claude Debussy and Ravel. Ravel we did a class on, his beautiful melodies. And Erik Satie. And we'll listen to some of these composers in a minute and listen to how Bill Evans was influenced by them. So he does a few albums with the trio and writes two of the songs that we're going to be looking at, but I'll save them till after we just kind of go through his life a little bit. But after these albums, he catches the eye of Miles Davis, and of course at that time in 1957, 58, Miles Davis was the biggest thing in jazz. He was the most exciting new thing that had happened to jazz. And if you remember his famous album Kind of Blue in 1959, well, Bill Evans was almost so instrumental in making that album, and I think Miles and Bill created that album. And people have said that Bill kind of brought in ideas and co-wrote the album. It's hard to say. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But this collaboration between Miles and Bill Evans was so important. And this, as we know, is the best-selling jazz album of all time. And kind of, we talk about this album all the time in 1959. So that's interesting because Bill Evans is starting to play in this way that Miles is playing, in this modal approach, right? We've talked about that modal, the two chords. Instead of a bunch of chord changes going on, it's only just maybe one or two chords, and it's exploring notes and patterns and modes over these just, 2 chords, 3 chords, 4 chords. But that's about it, I mean, they riff over these repeating chords. So Miles really likes that about Bill Evans, and vice versa. And the other thing that's interesting is that here's this white guy in the middle of this jazz movement going on, and on the Kind of Blue record. I mean, it just shows you, Miles had a lot of incidents with racist policemen and terrible, horrible stories of how he was just discriminated against. But he didn't care about that. He cared about the music. He didn't care that Bill Evans was a white guy, and a white guy that really stuck out. But with this fame of Kind of Blue, Bill Evans was in the spotlight, and as we talked about, he was very shy and very introverted. And his response to this was probably self-destructive, because he developed a really bad heroin addiction starting in the late 50s, and it's the addiction in general would plague him for the rest of his life. After Miles, he starts playing in trios, mostly trios for the rest, off and on for the rest of his career, but I mean mostly on. And what's interesting about these trios is usually bass and drums would just accompany the piano player, but here the bass and drums there would be interplay between the 3 musicians. They weren't just accompanying Bill, they were playing with Bill. So he recorded 50, 60 albums in his life, and died in 1980 at age 51. So as we said, he was often on drugs. He had a lot of pain in his life, which, we don't have to go into how depressing it was, but left just beautiful music for us to listen to. And we'll always have that music forever. And so that's wonderful. So that's a short, concise life of Bill Evans. And tomorrow we're going to be looking more into the theory of 2 songs in particular, Waltz for Debbie and Peace Peace. And we'll be looking at that from a kind of a very basic, rudimentary music theory approach. So we're going to do this together. It's going to be fun and great. So, okay, tomorrow will be Bill Evans Part 2. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow.